Hey YouTube, you're looking at the rear fender of a 2000 Dodge Durango. There's a plastic piece that comes across here that goes over top of this. It's like a fender flare, and there was a little bit of rust showing at the top of the fender flare. But when I took the fender flare off, the inner fender was gone, which you can see I replaced, and then the fender itself, or the quarter panel, whatever you want to call it, was eaten pretty much up into here. So even though you really couldn't see a lot of it, you could only see like just a little part of it. It was starting to eat all the way up to this point. So you're figuring there's at least 3 inches and another 3 inches. So it was pretty high. So you can see I just took the saw, or the grinder rather, and ground that out of there. So I made these pieces and I welded them in, and I put etching primer on them, which is what the Dodge had on it originally. So now I'm going to take a piece of what do you call this stuff? Cardboard from the construction cardboard or something? Poster board. That's it, poster board. I used to use this in school for stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the edge of this, and I'm going to mark off that edge because I want to butt weld this. Now the reason I'm butt welding this is because it isn't that big of a panel, and because of this curve in this steel, it's very strong there, and we got curves here for the door jamb, which is very strong, and then over in here there's another curve for the fender. So that metal's not going to warp easily. I'm not saying it won't warp if you don't weld it slowly, but it's not going to warp easily. Okay, so we're going to mark that off. I got to cut some of this out of here. I want to make sure that I have enough to return underneath the fender. I need that 90-degree return under there, so I can feel where that is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark that. Got a marker in my pocket here. Hopefully it writes. Yeah. So just going to push this against there lightly and run along the bottom of the inner fender that I put on. So what that does is that gives me the curve of the fender. So I'm going to take this back off of here now, and I'm going to just hold it up there so I can work with it a little bit. So now you can see the mark that's on there. You can see the mark that's on here for the fender. That's a little bit of an arc. It's not much of an arc, but it's a little bit. So what we'll do is just extend that a little. Extend this one a little bit beyond where the crease is. And I hope you can see, I don't know if you can see that really clearly, but there's a crease in here from where I pushed it against the fender. So then from here down now is where the fender would be. So I'm just going to run this out here like that. And then I'm going to take and I'm going to measure down here whatever that radius is. So let me grab something to measure with. The problem with these turns is they're not a perfect 90. Like if you look, let me just show you here. I'm going to grab the camera off of here. If you look at this radius that's, where the heck are we? If you look at this radius that's in here, it's not a 90. it's a nice turn. Okay, probably, I don't know, looks like a 1/2 inch radius or so. So we need enough metal to make the radius plus to reach inside there. Now what I have right at the bottom here seems to be enough, maybe a hair more with this little pinch here. So let me just measure this. Put the camera back up there. You're looking about 1.25 inches from about the center of the radius there. So we're going to add another 1/4 onto that, and we'll go down about 1.5 inches from here. Okay, I'm just going to put the tape like that so I can find my 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, all the way along here. And then what I'll do is I'll just join those dots together. And I'm basically going to just cut them out. You got to be careful when you're taking the tape off of this thing. Like everything else today that's freaking junk, you have to be careful how you mark this off. So I'm basically looking at this. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to bring this arc up here. And if you wanted to, you could put tape along that to give yourself a better line. I'm just going to mark it like this. Sort of like sketching. Over on the end here I want to take it down lower because I can always cut it off. I did the same thing over here. Alright, so that line then represents the length of the fender. Okay, so what we're going to do is cut that off. And what I'm looking for is the size of the sheet that I want. And you got to watch you don't get confused over which direction this thing was standing. This was like this. Okay. So that gives us that, and this will be the bend. So what I need to do now is cut a piece of steel about this size. It can come somewhere close to this line. I'm going to put a mark. I'd rather use a pencil for that. Hold on. A felt tip is nice for marking metal because you can see the line. The problem with it is when you're going to do your welding, what's wrong with it is that you'll end up cutting, it gives you too much of a variance to cut. You want a thinner line. Okay? Because the thickness of the felt tip is actually bigger than what a small MIG welder can close easily. I'm not saying I can't close the gap. I'm saying easily. So I don't want to be killing myself here trying to figure out what this thing needs as far as welding goes. So I'm going to cut above that a piece. Now remember, this is the back. Alright, I'll put back on here. So this will go on here like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this off with enough remaining on there that I can grind. Okay, so if I cut off I don't know, you got maybe 1/8 of an inch there or so, just in case. Now if I was going to flange this, I would want to lay the pattern over top of that, and I'd have to make it about a 3/8 or a 1/2 inch bigger. But I'm going to butt weld it, so in order to butt weld it I need it to be fairly close. The key to this metal work is to give yourself some metal that you can work with. Okay, so now you can see that's fairly close there, but what I'll do is I'll cut this out of a piece of steel. I'll bend this on a 90 in here. I'll shrink it down, I'll shrink it or expand it to make the panel fairly flat, because this panel is fairly flat, and then we'll fit it in there so that I can tack it here and there. So that's how I make the pattern for the piece that goes in there. And you can make these patterns fairly easily. I've showed you on my other videos how to make them with putting tape over them. Because this is such a flat panel, it's not really, when you have a panel that has a curve in it, a big curve, you got to allow for that curve, and working with flat things won't show that curve. Now this poster board bends with the curve, so you know it's easy to do, but sometimes you have a curve and a flare or whatever, and it's very hard to get the panel to be the right length for you for when you want to cut it out and weld it. You end up being short. So we're going to take this, use it as a pattern, and this is how we're going to start. We're going to bend this first. Okay? So I'll get back to you in another video on how far I've gotten, because I got a better camera. This is a Sony Handycam, but I don't want to make it use all its battery. So I'll get back to you in a little bit. Bye.